tell you, I was looking at the scriptures in the lectionary that's designated for today. Here we are in the second Sunday of Epiphany, and um, the season of Epiphany is all about the revelation of God's will. And when I read the scriptures for this week, in the back of my mind was also how we could honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and all the remarkable accomplishments that he contributed to our society. And so as I picked up the Bible and began reading the scripture lessons, which I do each week, I read all four. I read the Old Testament, the Gospel, the Psalm. I always save the Psalm for last, and I read the Epistle or the New Testament lesson. And I had always prayed that God will lead my heart to the passage that He wants me to use. And so I generally start with the Gospel because, of course, that's easy, low-hanging fruit. That's easy picking. But the Gospel of John tells the story of Jesus at the wedding feast in Cana, where He changes the water into wine, which we all know was His first miracle. And I was trying to think how that would relate to Dr. King's legacy and our celebration of his birthday tomorrow. And I tried my best to come up with some way to relate those two. And I believe, with all my heart that Dr. King led a movement that created some miraculous changes in our society, but I couldn't quite come up with a water to wine message with Dr. King. And so then I immediately went to the epistle lesson, which was from Corinthians, and it was talking about spiritual gifts, and I said, I know he had the gift of leadership and that sort of thing, and I looked at it, and I thought about it, and I prayed on it, and that didn't quite seem to correlate right with me either. So then I went to the Old Testament passage from Isaiah, which is an absolutely beautiful passage. It's a beautiful piece of poetry from Isaiah, but once again it fell short. And so last but not least, I turned to the Psalm. And as I read that Psalm, it became clear to me that that was the voice I was given for today. And it's rare that I preach from Psalms, but on occasion they really speak to me, and so this one today did. The Psalm 36 is attributed to David in most translations, but we find out if we do any study on the Psalm that he may or may not have written it, but it may have just been sung in his court. It may have been a psalm that was written by someone else, but sung in the court of David. And whoever sang this song obviously had great faith and trust in God. He also had a very deep understanding of the human heart, the human experience, if you read the first 4 verses before the passage for today. But the writer also found, in what we're going to look at today, a deep and rich experience of God in the very nature of who God is in our lives. And if there's one thing that I can say about Dr. King, it is that he knew what God had in store for his life. He answered the call as the pages unfolded. And so, like the author of this psalm, I know Dr. King had an absolute trust in God's steadfast and unfailing love, and he shared it with those just as the psalmist did in this writing today. I think what we also see in our passage for today is that God will nurture and nourish and refresh people as the very foundation of His grace. And we also see that God has compassion for all people, and all creation. And through this passage, we see that God truly is the fountain of life. So if you'd like to follow along with me, I'm going to be reading from the 36th Psalm. We'll look at verses 5 through 12. I invite you now to hear the word of the Lord. As the psalmist says, "Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your judgments are like the great deep. You save humans and animals alike, O Lord. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see life. Oh, continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your salvation to the upright of heart. Do not let the foot of the arrogant tread on me, or the hand of the wicked drive me away. Their evildoers lie prostrate. They are thrust down, unable to rise. This ends our reading for today. This is the Word of God, and it can be trusted. Thanks be to God. There's some of us here this morning that are old enough to remember what it was like to live in the 1960s and 70s. We're old enough to remember bell-bottom jeans, the Beatles, the infamous moon landing, flower power. But you know, that also makes us old enough to remember the integration of our schools, the protest against the Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement. In 1963, I was only 8 years old. But I do remember watching on closed-circuit television in the second grade. I remember watching Dr. King stand before the Lincoln Memorial. And he said that the Bank of Justice was not bankrupt. In all of the I Have a Dream speech, that's one part that stuck with me. The Bank of Justice is not bankrupt. An opportunity will never be limited to one race or one group of people. I didn't understand at that time because I was young the full meaning of what he was saying. I hadn't been exposed to a lot in this world. But as I matured and read his speech time and time again, it began to take on greater and greater significance for me. I don't know, has anybody here ever been to the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, in Auburn? The old one? There's a brand new, magnificent church across the street. But if you go to the old Ebenezer Baptist Church, and thanks to Delta Airlines, they have contributed enough money with the government shutdown. The Martin Luther King Memorial and the church, which is a part of the memorial, was shut down because of it's run by the Park Service. And thanks to Delta Airlines, that memorial is open through February the 8th. So I thank you, Delta, and I will make sure they get my money. But if you've ever been to the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I went on my very first class of seminary, and you can sit in this old auditorium, and they are playing the speeches and sermons of Martin Luther King over the loudspeaker. And there is just a sense of reverence and awe and respect in that place that's unbelievable. And so I can tell you it's powerful. It's powerful. And in that moment that I sat there listening, I think for then, the great light bulb went on for me that really understood that Martin Luther King Jr. knew the prophetic power of the pulpit. Somewhere along the way, the prophetic voice of the church has either been misdirected or misused. Because I'll tell you, we are fast losing a generation of people who no longer find the church relevant. And the true message of love and freedom is being lost on those who need to hear it like the rest of us. And so if the church doesn't find our voice to speak out against injustice and hatred, we're destined to completely lose an entire generation forever. Dr. King said that if the church becomes afraid of speaking out against injustice and oppression, and it allows its prophetic voice to become disabled, then we are simply going to become ineffective and have a weak sound and lose all relevance within our community. I'm here to tell you right now, the church was founded to boldly proclaim God's justice to those who need hope. And if we whisper, or if we say nothing at all, then we are blessing the status quo. We are helping those who would make greed their God, and we are blindly supporting them. When we become afraid to speak out, we allow the arrogant, and that's the psalmist's words, not mine. When we don't speak out against injustice and oppression, we allow the arrogant to walk over the poor and the oppressed. And when we fail to call out injustice because we're afraid, then we show an entire generation that not only are we hypocritical, but we too have become irrelevant and ineffective. The church today, more than ever, needs to heed the words of the prophet Micah. Because he tells us clearly what God expects of us. He doesn't say God expects, he says God requires. When the prophet asks the question, what does God require of us? This is the answer. Speak boldly. The question is, do we have the will to do it? Do we have the will to act justly? Do we love mercy? And are we willing to walk humbly with our God? That's what the requirements are. I'm here to tell you, this generation's eyes are on the church to see what kind of people worship there. Like Dr. King, I too have a dream. I wish I could be as eloquent as him. I wish I could be as powerful as he is. But this dream that I have is that the church that I love so dearly will stand up and say with a clear and unbroken voice that we are the people who worship an awesome God. And our awesome God's steadfast love extends beyond heaven for all people. We serve a righteous God whose faithfulness is higher than any mountain that we can see. Any foundation that is built on the one true God will reach all people, no matter the gender, the color of their skin, who they love, how they survive, and they will be lifted up. I dream of a church that will not be satisfied and will not settle down until all God's children have enough. In case you would think this is just a pipe dream, or not possible in our times, I'll remind us all that the psalmist who wrote this was also living in troubled times. You know, many of us worry about affordable health care. We worry about how we're going to survive this crazy economy. And perhaps in the back of our mind, we worry about how we're going to make it without a living wage or being able to access healthy food. Have you ever noticed how the healthy food is more expensive than the unhealthy food? And we wonder why our country is living in an epidemic of obesity? It's greed. Perhaps in the back of our minds, we're worried about whether to get a prescription filled or pay the power bill. The writer of our song celebrates God's economy. God's economy where there's enough for everyone to be taken care of. And it's up to God's people to move the idea of God's economy forward. And folks, God's people is the church. In God's economy, all the workers get paid a livable wage and a sustainable wage. You don't have to work 3 jobs in God's economy just to pay the bills. In God's economy, everyone is invited to sit at the table and feast. In God's economy, a child's lunch of biscuits and sardines is turned into good news for the hungry. In God's economy, the He says, what will happen to this fellow if I don't help him? Some say the church needs to stay in its lane, not get involved in all this political stuff. But if we, the people, don't get involved, and we don't bring about God's economy, who will? Social justice is God's justice. And I believe that the church is responsible for providing a clear, consistent vision of what God's justice looks like. Our time here, the church's mission is to prepare ourselves and all of God's children for God's reign. And if we're doing this according to Jesus in his very first sermon, that means the hungry are fed, the needy are tended to, and the naked are clothed, because that's what justice looks like in God's economy. And from a deep place of courageous faith, I believe with all my heart the church must lead the way in God's economy. We must stand up and say that in God's economy, everyone has enough to eat. Everyone has enough places to stay and sleep. Everyone has enough jobs to provide a living wage. Everyone has access to an affordable and available education. And that we have enough dignity to support our elderly folks in their years. And that health care is available for everyone. We who are God's people must make it so. Perhaps our work in accomplishing God's economy will help us to discover what kind of people we are. But more than that, it will help us to discover who our true God is. And then we gather around and we sing and we celebrate that we have found refuge in the shadow of God's wings. And we can cry out, how precious is your steadfast love of God. And we can feast on the abundance of his table. And we all drink from the river of his delights. Because as long as one person is going hungry or thirsty or without, God's economy has not come to fulfillment. And through this God, this loving and holy God, we will find life, the fountain of life. Amen.